Hello, guys, and welcome to the FSF Podcast. I'm Tim. I'm your host. I'm just here to remind you that this show is made by nerds for nerds. So if you're listening, you're a nerd, and we love you. Our guest today, though, is a World War I historian, a published author in regards to the rise and fall of real-world powers, and also a massive fan of Star Wars with 2 comprehensive studies of Star Wars published. Now, we're going to talk about one of those books today, his most recently published work, and I am geeked, really excited to welcome Dr. Chris Kempshall to the FSF podcast. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you very much for having me. I've been looking forward to this for ages since you first contacted me.
I'm excited. I saw your book come out. And I'm like, just the pre-release notes and information about it. I was like, that's a guy I need to talk to. That's gonna be that book's gonna be amazing. And the book that we're talking about is right here. It's called The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. And if you haven't gotten yourself a copy yet, please go do so. This book is outstanding. If you think you know Star Wars history, trust me, you don't. Go check this out, because there is stuff I found out as I was going through this book where I was legitimately going, oh, well, that makes more sense if that was the way it went. So there's a lot of cool things. No spoilers given today on that part, but just go check it out. It's very, very cool.
It's weird and interesting that you say that your instinct when you've heard about it coming out was like, oh, that's a guy I need to talk to, because that's not been my experience at parties and the like. That when I start doing that, that's not been the vibe I've got from like ordinary people. So it's nice to be to kind of be on the other side of the fence.
You just have to find your people, Chris.
That's fine. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, find your people. All right. So before we get started into your book or your work as an author, because here at the FSF Podcast, we're nerds. We love a good origin story. And so we want to know what the origin of Chris Kempshall is. So in your story, what were the things that influenced you to become the author and historian that we have in front of us today?
That's a really good question. I mean, to an extent, I'm kind of like a bad semi-fake historian, because I never actually wanted to be a historian when I was growing up. When young Chris was setting out into the world with kind of bright eyes, and like young Chris wanted to be a soccer commentator, because I'm a big football fan. And then it turned out you don't really need that many soccer commentators in the world. I mean, there's a decent number of games that take place on a weekend, but not enough to like, oh yeah, you can be our 1000th soccer commentator. So I kind of fell into studying history because I didn't really know what else to do. And I kind of meandered through. I'd always had a kind of an ongoing interest in the First World War, but beneath the veneer of geeky historian Chris lay the shadow of geek Chris, who liked Star Wars and computer games and stuff like that. So, I mean, in many ways, my inner geek and my outer geek look very, very similar. It's basically a matter of what T-shirt they're wearing on any given day of the week. And when I finished my PhD, which was on kind of Allied relations in the First World War, which was fun and cool, and something that I still go back to, but then I started getting the opportunity to kind of like do other things. So I did some work on like how history and war is portrayed in computer games, because I like computer games, and it meant that I could do some research and play some computer games and call it work, and that felt like a win on a day-to-day basis. And then I kind of made a hop into examining how history and politics gets portrayed in Star Wars as a franchise. And whilst I was working on that, I got a random email one day which went into my spam folder, which, if you don't think that's kept me up at night from time to time,
I bet
you'd be right. From DK, saying that they'd seen that I was doing this type of work, and they were working on a book called Battles That Changed the Galaxy, which was like a military history of Star Wars battles, and would I be interested in coming and helping them write it? And I'd wanted to do something like that since I was like 14, 15 years old, when I'd always liked the Star Wars films, and then I started reading Star Wars novels like Spectre of the Past by Timothy Zahn, and playing X-Men versus TIE Fighter, and playing computer games, and like, yeah, I want to do that. That's exactly what I want to do. And it all kind of then slightly spiraled from there. But the easy answer to what has happened to make me sit here with you is just outrageous good fortune. I'm the beneficiary of incredible good luck, which is wonderful. But you can't teach people how to do it. I don't know how to tell anybody else how to walk this path. It just I feel very, very lucky.
No, that's a great answer, and I think that more than often than not, those who are in similar positions to what you've expressed, it's a combination of hard work and good fortune. You have to put the effort in. You have to have taken step one to get to step two. So although you may not have, you know, ever wanted to be the historian when you were younger, that certainly has led to good things on down the road. So yeah, I get that. I do.
And
I,
it's
and
and it's fun to tie it all together because you can almost see like a weird Venn diagram of like history and media and
yep,
Star Wars, and go, sure, you can be that guy. And yeah, it's all kind of pleasingly come together, but it's also like a Venn diagram, designed by Frankenstein. That some of those circles aren't proper circles. They shouldn't be.
a little Abby normal every now and then never hurts anybody. So. No, that's a great answer. It really is. It makes me think about my own upbringing because when I was a kid, I wanted to be. So here in America, we have ESPN, the sports network, and
Yes.
I wanted to be a ESPN commentator. I wanted to be the guy on, doing the Stuart Scott, cool as the other side of the pillow quips and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that's what I wanted to do. And then as I got older, there were girls and I got distracted. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I can understand
so,
that.
so just kind of circling back around and doing something similar, but completely different and talking nerdy instead of talking about sports. But yeah, now you mentioned the one book. Now you've authored two DK Star Wars books. You mentioned the Star Wars Battles That Changed the Galaxy. Of course, we're talking about this one here today, The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, which the really cool thing about this book to me, by the way, which I was surprised about. I was not expecting all the super cool pictures
Aren't
in
they
this.
great?
This is fantastic. And then tying in it, and it's not just from like one era of the Empire. It's all over the place and from recent shows and all that kind of stuff. And there's a couple different sections of pictures. And yeah, I was like, oh, wow, little visual never hurts anybody.
Yeah, we were really
Um,
pleased that we could put those in, and I remember, like the word coming down, like we were going to be able to have like X amount of images. It was like, that's a decent number of images that we can play with. There's like a
yeah,
Goldilocks zone with images where suddenly, if it's too few, it's like, well, I don't know what to pick, and if it's too many, it's like they don't feel special anymore. And I
right.
think I think we nailed it.
Oh, I think so too. Yeah, they're all very relevant to what's going on in the book, and it makes sense that the ones that you picked are the ones you pick because it kind of helps you get a tie of the timeline of from beginning to end of
Yeah,
where the galaxy was, where it ended up, all that kind of stuff. Um, but so the books that you have focus not so much on the lore, but more on politics and the wars and how the Galactic Empire came both to power and then fell out of power. That's what we're talking about.
yeah.
But what is it about Star Wars from a historical lens that you enjoy?
I think I like the amount of it. That there is a lot of Star Wars, and it covers an increasingly broad span of time, which means that there's plenty of material in that you can zoom in and focus in on. But the historian in me also likes the fact that, and we all know this, but we just kind of pretend that we don't, that actually everything in Star Wars is history because it all happened a long time ago in a
Mm-hmm.
galaxy far, far away. So everything is of the past, and everything can be kind of changed by the distance of time or by the perception of a particular moment. And you have things happening at every single level. So if I want to do like a Star Wars diplomatic history. Well, here's a bunch of senators. Here's the Emperor. Here's Mon Mothma. Here's all of these people who
Mm-hmm.
kind of live in that upper echelon of kind of political society. You think, no, I want to talk about battle. It's like, here's a bunch of Star Destroyer captains. Here's Wedge Antilles doing stuff. Here's Han Solo and Luke Skywalker blowing up the Death Star and the like. I think no. I want ordinary people. It's like, well, here's Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, or here's the cast of
Mm-hmm.
Andor, and there's every form of history that you might want encapsulated in Star Wars. It's a really rich bounty to look at. You could write like a really gripping social history of Star Wars just by talking about ordinary people who were doing ordinary things, and it would be amazing because Star Wars is lived in. It feels like it's populated by real characters and
Hmm.
real people doing real things. It doesn't feel fake in that sense, like it's only been constructed to exist on the screen for the next 30 seconds. It breathes, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the type of thing that historians love.
I think that, you're talking about the real people doing real people things. I think for me that's, on a little bit of a side note and away from your book, but I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoyed the Andor series so much. Is
Yes.
because it was real people in a real situation. There was nary a force power or a lightsaber anywhere to be seen, and it was just obviously amazing storytelling, but it was the being able to see this all happening from a real person's perspective and a
Yeah.
real group of people and what they were dealing with. So I think that's kind of a cool thing.
And they have 9 to 5 jobs, and they'll clock
Yeah,
in and they'll clock out, and then they go home, and it's normal,
living
but
real
it's in
lives.
space.
Yeah, living real lives. Yeah. And two, I thought about this, because now one of my middle school teachers, he had a couple of different sayings, that he liked to use over and over again. Uh, One is that because as teenage boys tend to do, we assume a lot of things, and if you assume, you make an ass out of you and me. And I was told that one quite regularly. Apparently, I did a lot of assuming as a young man. Uh, but the other one that stuck with me is he said that, those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. And I think that that's also, from a historical viewpoint, something we see in the Star Wars universe. People ignoring the history of their galaxy, and then we see that same kind of like that, almost that same storyline repeating over and over again, with just different names and faces.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that, and that feeling of being either guided towards or trapped in a future that you either do or don't want absolutely infuses Star Wars. People talk about destiny all
Hmm.
the time. This is the path that was laid out for you. This, you were destined to do this. But also that feeling of being taken somewhere you don't want to go, and not being able to get off of that path. You
Hmm.
definitely see it at various points in the Star Wars franchise of characters heading in a direction, and they're not necessarily doing it willingly, although on some level, either for good or ill, they'll embrace that moment and kind of take control of their destiny. But always this kind of sense of, this has happened before in some way, shape, or form, and did we deal with it the right way previously? Did we deal with it the wrong way? Because it's hard to tell now whether we should do something different, or whether we've forgotten the thing we're supposed to remember, or we've remembered the thing we're supposed to forget.
Okay. So between your books, the battles that changed the galaxy and the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire, what's the biggest difference, would you say, between the two of those? These are both published by DK Publishing, by the way. But what is the biggest difference between these books, and what was the impetus for writing the rise and fall of the Galactic Empire?
So there's a few kind of, in universe and out universe, I'll say, differences between them. I mean, the out universe is that Battles That Change the Galaxy is a far more visual book than Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire. We've just spoken that there are sets of images in Rise and Fall, but not to the extent that you get in Battles That Change the Galaxy. It's a big kind of sprawling kind of coffee table book, and it was also created as part of a writing team. So I was there with Jason Fry and Amy Radcliffe and Cole Horton, all of whom are much more famous than I am, for doing Star Wars stuff. And being far more important about doing Star Wars stuff than I am. So that was, as an introduction, that was a kind of a different experience of being firstly the newbie, doing stuff and creating a kind of a collaborative work that's sort of written in universe. There is a kind of an in universe voice to battles, but it's not kind of explicitly in
Right.
universe in the way that Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire is explicitly in universe. It identifies the narrator, the author of it, as being the character Beaumont Kin, who's in The Rise of Skywalker. It's a prose book in a similar fashion to say like Christian Baver's Skywalker or Family at War. So
Right.
it's designed to look and read like a history book.
I'm
And
sorry, don't you mean Curtin Braves?
yes, Kitrin Braves.
Yes,
If only we could crack the code as to who that was.
I know.
It's a mystery.
I'm at a loss continuously.
Yeah, yeah. I keep trying to write the letters out on a piece of paper, and it's not
There's
working
an
for me.
anagram there
But
somewhere.
there is an anagram there somewhere, and at some point we'll hear back from NASA, and they'll have cracked that code for us. But
Somebody
until
will.
then,
Somebody far smarter than us will figure it out.
um, the impetus behind writing. I mean, for me, there was an element of it's the book that I've always wanted to write, particularly as a historian. And once I was kind of working on battles, there was that kind of slow dawning realization of like, do you reckon you're going to get a better chance to suggest this to someone, Chris? Are you waiting for like a silver platter to arrive before you mention this to someone? Because it feels like now might be the moment that I wanted to write a book like this, because I thought it would be super interesting and super. I thought it would be really fascinating as a study, but also as like an examination of what it might be like to be a historian in the Star Wars universe. And I wanted, I identified the historian that I wanted, and the time period that I wanted to write this, because of what I thought was kind of like the narrative potential of
Mhm.
it. And as you say, we're not doing spoilers here for the listeners. But one of the kind of what I can do as a little tease is that one of the most closely guarded secrets of the book in the lead up to it was everybody was like, it's a history book, and everybody, me and everybody at DK and Lucasfilm just went, sure, because that is a description of the book, but it's not a complete description of the book to say that it's just a history book, because Beaumont
Right.
Kin, as the author of it, is very, very important to the book. And I don't want to say how he's important to the book, because I like people going in slightly cold to it, but I don't think it is just a history book in that
No,
sense.
no. I love the fact that okay, so when I first got it, I was like, "Oh, it's going to be a historical book." So, I was looking at it as a historical retelling or a purely factual book.
Yes,
And
exactly.
not
Because
that
why would you not think that?
right, and not that it's not. It is a factual book. However, the delightful twist is that it's not just in 19 BBY this happened here and um this thing exploded over here and this person found force powers. Yay.
Yeah, and
No,
presumably people were happy or sad.
yeah, exactly. Some people there was much rejoicing. Yay. Um but I love the fact that it has that story line to it. And that
Yes.
makes it such a better read. And I think that that's one of the most important things when you get this book, is that you have to understand that yes, it is a historical book, but there's a story here as well, and it's very kudos to you, sir. You did a really good job at laying it
Oh,
out.
thank you.
It's very well told. um yeah, and so yeah, kudos to you for that. It's yeah, for those who haven't read this book yet, I mean, it's about 400 and some odd pages, I believe, that
Yeah,
we're
it's
looking.
pretty beefy.
Yeah, right about 400 pages, but you'll be flying through it faster than you think you're going to, because this book is just it's so well written. So, you guys got to need to take a check at that, but
Because I can understand the temptation. It's a similar temptation that I would have had when if I was to go to like a Barnes and Nobles and I go, oh, I've got a new history book, I might jump to the chapter that I'm most interested in. And you can jump around the book. There's
sure.
nothing. You don't have to read it in a linear thing. But it was written in a way that I think you get more out of it. Things make more sense if you
Absolutely.
read it in a linear fashion.
Yeah.
Partly because of what Beaumont Kin's trying to say, but also because it draws in, or it'll flag stuff up in one chapter and then it'll suddenly become super relevant like 5 or 6 chapters down the line as a little payoff of something that Beaumont Kin's done his historical foreshadowing with. So
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said for reading it as a book.
Oh, absolutely. I realized in reading it in the introduction that this was not going to be a typical history book. And I was like, and that piqued my interest immediately, because as interested as I was from it in the book as a historical book, now I was looking at it as historical fiction. And I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be kind of cool. This is a storytelling we're getting, and it's very evident in the introduction that that's what's happening. So yeah, very cool.
Thank you. Yeah, the introduction was one of the first. You know, it sounds daft to say the introduction was one of the first things we wrote. It's like, yeah, it's the beginning of the book, Chris. Good job. But
You
getting
nailed
it,
it.
yeah, 100%. Did you do the conclusion last by any chance? But the desire to get that right because of how important it was going to be for everything else was like one of the prime considerations for us when we were kind of putting it together. Because if we hadn't landed and nailed the introduction, then I just don't know if the rest of it works.
Right. Right. And the introduction ties in really well to the first chapter. And that's, I do like how well the chapters tie into to one another. It's not, I never felt like there was like a just, sometimes in books, there's like going between chapter to chapter, it kind of feels like, okay, we just dumped that storyline. We're moving on to this. And don't worry,
Yeah,
it'll all tie back later in about 7 chapters down the road. This I felt was very linear, very chronologically based, and it all made sense as it went. It was very well laid out in that respect. So yeah, I did like that as well.
that's kind of the feeling of that we wanted, of kind of almost Beaumont Kin taking you by the hand and walking you through it, but walking you through it in a way that you kind of you you feel the empire kind of rising up around you in ways that are slightly kind of
Mm-hmm.
increasingly unsettling, was what we were kind of aiming for as you kind of move through the book of suddenly feeling actually we've gone pretty deep and dark here, and it felt like a natural progression on the way in, but and now I'm not sure if I like it now that I'm in it.
All right. But that is how it goes too, for sure. So with that thought in mind and the progression of this, I mean, when it comes to the rise and the fall of the empire, there's a lot that could be easily overlooked when it comes to the rise and the fall, especially with the power of Palpatine.
Yes.
But if we're to boil it down to simplicities, because there's a whole chapter in here about just Sheev Palpatine himself,
Yeah.
or as I like to call him, Captain Sparkle Fingers. Um,
That's going to get you on a list somewhere, a little ISB folder.
right? Uh, but if we were to boil it down to simplicities, what is the single most important thing that you think aided his rise to power, but conversely led to the demise of the empire?
I think I think the varying reaction of desperation, I think, is probably like the emotion of desperation, because firstly it's the type of thing that can be exploited, and we see that we see it in the prequel trilogies and the like, and there's a kind of an ongoing line of argument in the books that kind of coming out of the Clone Wars, people were so desperate for it to stop, and desperate for things to be different and desperate for things
Mm-hmm.
to be better, that effectively they become content to take what they're given because it feels better and it feels less awful, and you know you slightly sated my sense of desperation, but desperation acts in unusual ways, and what you end up also seeing in the book, and again at various points of the wider franchise, is that people rebel out of desperation, because that feeling still provokes people to do things, and you know out of a sense of fear, or like you know the empire's taken everything, there's nothing left, and still like there's 5 more stormtroopers on the corner today than there were yesterday. I reckon there'll be 5 more on the corner again tomorrow. I don't know what it is you want from me. Now you've taken all of my taxes, you've taken everything, and still the pressure is being applied and applied, and eventually that feeling of desperation doesn't motivate people to comply. It motivates people to fight back. And I think that the Empire never fully realizes or grasps that the desperation that they made use of to construct themselves is the type of desperation that was going to motivate people to tear them down again afterwards.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've never looked at it. It's just I understood I kind of get the desperation on the way in because
Yeah.
having watched the Clone Wars, having watched the prequel movies, you definitely see that in the Senate.
Yes.
The desperation to get this war over with, get it done, whatever it takes.
Yeah,
They were
just do the
throwing
thing.
money
Just
at
make it stop.
right. In the beginning, they're throwing money at things blindly, taking loans, these high interest, these loans that are basically killing the Republic
Yeah.
financially to do whatever it needs to be done. Just get this thing done and over with. So yeah, I definitely see the air of desperation there. Even when they gave Palpatine emergency powers, it was an act of desperation.
Yes. And he's a
And
trustworthy guy.
oh, absolutely. Who would have seen that coming? Um, uh, Certainly not Yoda. Uh,
No, God.
and then, but yeah, I never really thought about it in desperation on the way out. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that if you keep squeezing people in a similar way to how the Clone Wars was squeezing people,
Yeah,
eventually you're going to get a similar result. And it just never quite comprehending that, I think is an interesting way to look at the Empire. As it was pretty smart of utilizing that when it needed to,
mm-hmm.
and not smart enough to realize how to avoid it when it also needed to.
Right. To when to stop
Yeah.
squeezing the stone. Yeah, that makes so much sense. It's a really good outlook on that.
I spent a lot of time thinking about the Galactic Empire, in that possibly
Oh,
more
clearly.
time than any rational person should spend over the last 2 years. Just
Okay.
sitting here
Well,
staring at my bust of Emperor Palpatine, going, "But what can you teach me that I need to put in my book?"
I'm not doing it today, but typically I drink out of Vader's head. So,
There we go.
but yeah,
That's another
oh,
list.
that's another list I'm making it on. But yeah, no, that's really cool because I often thought of it as desperation going in, but I couldn't figure out what was the key thing that brought them to their demise. To me, it was always um, just the arrogance of we're too big to fail.
Yeah.
That's how I always looked at it. But I think desperation also fits into that same category because even though they were arrogant, they were desperate not to lose what they had. And
Yes.
and so in their desperation, they clamped down even harder
Yeah. And you
on
put
who.
people into a situation where they're going, well, if if a stormtrooper is going to shoot me anyway, just for walking down the street, for doing whatever it is that I'm doing, then does it make an awful lot of difference if I shoot a stormtrooper?
Right.
And
You're
once you
you're
start
done
thinking
either way.
along those lines, yeah, then it's not a long walk to the Rebel Alliance.
No, not at all. Yeah. That makes a whole lot of sense. I'm going to be thinking about this after we're done and we hang up today. This
God,
is
I'm so
gonna
sorry.
No, this is okay. The problem is so it's not my problem, it's her problem. I am married to a very understanding woman who I love dearly, and she's not a big Star Wars fan. She appreciates Star Wars because I love Star Wars.
Yeah.
But there are many times where I'll be talking to her and I'll be like, "What about this?" And that she's like, who are we talking about again? I'm like, well, in the show Ahsoka, there's this character who did this, and there's that, and yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's like, do you have 5 minutes to talk about Grand Moff Tarkin?
exactly, exactly. The many errors of Grand Moff Tarkin. Ah. All right. Well, there's a question I love to ask all Star Wars people that I have on the show, and we've had a very good run of luck to get as many Star Wars folks on the show as we have, which is awesome for me because it's like getting a chance to play in the sandbox a little bit. So I
And I'm
asked
going to
this of
guess
anyone who
that similarly, a lot of them are a lot more famous than I am.
Well, they're all more famous than me, so there you go. If that makes it feel any
Raise your
better.
podcast.
There you go. Because I like to ask this question because I know what Star Wars means to me, and someday I hope to have my name on a Star Wars byline somewhere that says this article was written by Tim Biesiegel. That would be,
Yeah.
I would giggle incessantly. But what does Star Wars mean to you on a personal level?
It's a really, really good question. So there's no point in my life that I'm not aware of Star Wars. To the
Right.
extent I don't remember finding out that Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father. I never had my Empire Strikes Back moment. I've just always known it. And particularly when I was kind of finishing up secondary school and I was reading a lot of like Star Wars books. And there was periods of that time when I was quite unwell, so I was, sitting at home in bed being unwell reading Star Wars books. So Star Wars was a really, really important kind of aspect of my life at that time point. But I think the best thing that I can point to is, so there used to be a computer game. And anybody who's listened to me do these interviews before, get your little bingo card out and get your red pen, because that time has
Here it
come.
comes.
Here it comes. It's called Star Wars Galaxies. It was an online, massively multiplayer online game. And I played that when I was like finishing up before I went to university over here, and for the opening part of like my undergraduate degree. And whilst I was playing that game, I was also writing a lot of fan fiction at the same time, kind of playing around with the Star Wars universe and crafting it. And those two things together have probably been some of the most important things I've ever done in my life. Because I'm definitely not sat here talking to you now if I hadn't played that game and I wasn't writing fan fiction. And generally, or rather genuinely, I think about Star Wars Galaxies probably once every single day. The fact that it doesn't exist anymore, it isn't in my life, is like a wound that won't heal. Because the game was amazing, it made me super happy, and yeah, everything about it, living in the Star Wars universe and playing with other people living in the Star Wars universe, was everything that I wanted at that moment in my life, and it's still kind of everything that I want at this moment in my life. And writing characters, some of which may have appeared in more official literature as fan fiction and the like, meant that. So I wanted to be a historian for like 15 years or so. The start of my PhD up until now. And I wanted to do something in the Star Wars universe since at least I was 15 years old. So, I'm going to be 41 years old this year. That's a big old chunk of time. So the fact that a couple of weeks ago, I went into London on release day, and I just randomly went into a few bookshops to see on a shelf The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire and my name on it. I don't know how to talk about that because of how much it means to me. Yeah, Star Wars is the thing that makes me happy. And the fact that I now get to do something relating to the thing that makes me happy is ridiculous and wonderful, and it makes me very happy.
I love it. That's an awesome answer. Really is. I think because a lot of what you just said resonates with me, because when I was growing up, now I wasn't unwell, I was pretending, but I would stay home from school, and back at that time we only had the 3 Star Wars movies. Back in my day, we only had 3 movies.
And they'd only been changed 5 times.
Exactly. But I had them all on one VHS tape because we had recorded them illegally.
100. Yep, same.
And I would stay home and I would just put that tape in, watch all 3 movies, rewind it, start all over again. I would do that just over and over again whenever I would stay home from school. And then as I got older, and I had read a few of the books. I really wasn't that big into the books for whatever reason. But then the game Star Wars Battlefront came out, and
God,
Battlefront 2 was where I hang or hung my hat for the longest time in the video game world. That was there. I could not get enough of that game. I
It was
loved every
brilliant.
yeah. Oh, it's just absolutely amazing. And so yeah, that one and the Knights of the Old Republic when they discontinued support for both of those games, I was
Yeah,
crestfallen. I was
yeah.
absolutely crestfallen. I just that I was like, but my game, you're taking it away. I was yeah, just
Why do you hate
destroyed.
me and fun? Why would you do this to
Exactly.
me in particular?
And I correlate all that leading up to this point in my life where I steal the line from the show Ted Lasso. There's the Danny Rojas
Yes,
character. You know,
yes.
football is life.
Star Wars is life.
Star Wars is life. Everything. I can't wait for the next Star Wars release. I every Tuesday night for the Acolyte series as it came out, I was sitting there at 8:59 remote in hand, drink in the other hand going, "Okay, are we starting? Are we done yet?" My family was on threat of death. I have 1 hour slated for Star Wars. You will not talk to me. You will be quiet. You will let
Yeah.
me enjoy.
Because why would you not love this? And the new
Yeah.
thing, and it comes out. I remember like one of the most joyous, genuinely one of the most joyous experiences of my life was sitting in a cinema on the opening night at midnight for The Force Awakens, and people cheered and they
Oh
clapped
yeah.
and they laughed, and it was wonderful. How can you not? How can you not feel that?
I loved each of those experiences. Every time a Star Wars movie has been released, whatever your end feeling was about it, going into it and seeing that crawl for the first time on the screen for that new
Yeah,
movie, I get chills on my spine just talking about it. That crawl is and the opening note of the song every
yeah.
time John Williams score just that's all kinds of
And
feelings.
the crowd go nuts if you're in the cinema, and it's like watching a football game.
It
It's
really
brilliant.
is. It really is. Oh boy. Chris, I honestly get the feeling that you and I could sit here and talk about Star Wars to an insane degree that would, well, yeah, we a long time. Let's just put it that way. This has been a lot of fun for me. I have one final question for you, Chris,
Go for it.
and we call it our silly question. Now,
Silly questions are the best questions.
absolutely. Now we call it a silly question because you can answer it as silly or as serious as you want. And typically, I have my co-host Kathleen here, who has a 5-year-old daughter. And somebody asked this question of her daughter, but not her. And so Kathleen was a little offended and said, well, this should be asked of everyone.
Yeah,
So
100%.
so now here we are. So, Chris Kempshall, what's your favorite dinosaur?
Oh, that's a great question. Firstly, even before we get to that point, why would you not? If you're sitting here listening, go, I don't know if I have a favorite. Like, why would you not have a favorite dinosaur? Everybody should have a favorite dinosaur. Um, and I have very strong feelings about. I really like Triceratopses, but I really like Stegosauruses as well. And it, God, this is harder than asking me to ask. What's my favorite part of the book? Because this matters more. I'm going to say Stegosaurus today. I'm going to
All
say,
right.
yeah, I'm going to say Stegosaurus today. But honestly, you could have asked me in a week, and I'll have leaned back in the direction of Triceratops for no reason that I can quantify logically. But yeah, today it's Stegosaurus.
I like that answer. I gave a preemptive fist pump because I got excited when you said Triceratops because that's my favorite. I was like, yes, there's another one of us.
Yeah. Well, join. You're going to get my little badge out and my little certificate of club membership, and you're going to teach me the secret handshake. And
Well, I
no,
can't do
now I've
that
got to go with
anymore. So that's
Stegosaurus.
that. Yeah. No, I've always loved Triceratops. I've always thought they were really cool because I've always really enjoyed rhinos. And I was like, to
Yeah,
me, it was a triple rhino, 3 horns and the whole 9 yards. And so
yeah. It's like it's been enhanced. It's even more rhinoceros.
it was exactly it's super rhino. So
But very old super
very
rhino.
old. Back in my day, rhinos had 3 horns. Anyway, all right.
But now the problem is now I'm suddenly thinking of how amazing it was in Jurassic Park to see the Triceratops on the screen, and it's like
Hmm.
that's just the coolest thing. And it's the type of thing that in like in less than a day will send me leaning way back towards Triceratops again.
No, I understand. Yeah, I vacillate honestly. So Triceratops has always been number one, but I'm a meat and potatoes type of guy, so the T-Rex is like right behind it with number two. Just
Yeah,
because growing
why
up,
would it
that
not
was always
be?
the big scary one that's always in the cartoons. It's always in, you know,
It's on the front
everything
cover of the
else.
book.
Yeah, it's they so yeah, it's the meat and potatoes answer, but
It's still a good answer, and any answer that involves somebody having a favorite dinosaur is a
it's a
justified
good
answer.
answer.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, Chris, thank you so much for being on our show today. Where can people go to find out more about you, your works, or anything you have coming up?
So, I mean, I say this a lot, one of the benefits of being the only Chris Kempshall who's ever existed is that, like, all of the branding becomes real easy. So if you go on Twitter or Instagram or Threads or Blue Sky, it's all of them is just at Chris Kempshall or some variation of whatever kind of naming structure that they have on those platforms.
Right.
And I'll be talking about the book quite a lot, to the extent that it shouldn't be long until people start getting bored of me talking about the book for online for all of those, particularly now as we're starting to get a little bit further away. It's only been a couple of weeks since it's come out, but people are starting to read through the book, so I've avoided doing any like spoiler conversations of that online, but give it a month or two, and I imagine those conversations will start to kind of adapt into talking about bits and pieces of the book. I've got a website which is highly imaginatively titled chriskempshall.com, where you can find out more about my other bits and pieces of work.
I for one am shocked at that website name, sir.
I know, God, if only it was possible to have seen it coming. No, nobody ever said I was an imaginative man. And you'll find different bits and pieces about something. If you want to find out some of the history stuff that I've done, you'll find out bits and pieces of it there. So those are probably like the best places to find me. One of the things that I always forget to mention is I'm part of my own podcast. It's about the First World War in popular culture. So if you've got like a history itch, it's called Oh What a Lovely Podcast. And again, there's a Twitter account and Instagram account. There's a website, all of which I think you can find from links on my website. And we talk about the ways in which the First World War exists in kind of popular culture. But the other two presenters for me are all academics like me. So it's a kind of like three academics sitting down and talking about whatever, a film that we've watched recently or a book that we've read recently or
cool.
Something like that. Which is those can be a lot of fun.
That's very cool. I like that. All right. Well, we'll make sure those links get into the show notes down below.
Oh, thank you so much.
Can check out what you've got going on and everything else. And this seems like a really good time to remind the audience that if you haven't clicked that subscribe button yet, go ahead and do so, because that's going to help us to continue to grow, get amazing guests like Dr. Chris Kempshall here today. And have these amazing conversations. Chris has been a very fun guest, and I'm sure I will be listening to this interview back a couple different times, just because there's a lot of that we discussed here and a lot of cool stuff that I'm going to want to go back over. But please subscribe. It helps out more than we'll ever really be able to tell you. And go check out Chris's work as well. And I know that I'll be checking out his podcast because for whatever reason in my research, I missed the fact that you had a podcast. So I think I was just so hung up on the book.
I forget to always mention it. My other presenters must be like, Chris, please, you're doing things. Could you just drop it in? I'm in Star Wars mode. What do you want from me? And they're like, subscribers. That's what we want from you.
Exactly. We want a plug, a shameless plug. That's what we want. Anyway, go check out Chris's stuff. Go check out that pop culture World War I podcast. That sounds amazing to me, and I cannot wait to check that one out. But yeah, again, Chris, thank you for being on the show. Everyone, thank you for tuning in today, and that's going to conclude us for the FSF Popcast. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody.
Copyright 2024 FSF Popcast. Reference to any specific product or entity mentioned on this podcast does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by FSF Popcast. The views expressed by guests are their own and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. If you have any questions about this disclaimer, please contact us via email at info@fsfpopcast.com.